Hello, and welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. My name is Faden, and I'm the founder of Cape Coffee Beans, South Africa's leading retailer in the specialty coffee space. We sell everything you need to make an amazing cup of coffee at home, at the office, in the cafe, or even on the road, including equipment, accessories, and artisan roasted coffee beans, both online and in store at our headquarters in Claremont, Cape Town. This podcast is a deep dive into the world of South African specialty coffee with a focus on the brands, the businesses, and the people in the local coffee scene, many of whom I'm privileged to work with. I'll be bringing you interviews with many of these South African coffee heroes, so please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with your coffee-loving friends. Thank you for your support. Now let's get to today's episode. Today's episode is one that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. Ever since I started this podcast, a lot of people have asked me, when are you going to interview Jake from Tribe? And it was meant to happen early on, and we had some scheduling conflicts, but I'm glad that it finally happened now. This is a really great episode. I think a lot of people will enjoy it. We touch on a lot of different things. You may laugh, you may cry. There are hilarious parts of the story, some sad parts of the story, and really just an amazing story of a business that got started under unlikely circumstances. Jake's got a fascinating background and some really interesting perspectives on coffee and blending and all kinds of different things. So I have no doubt that you'll enjoy this one. One little bit of warning is I probably wouldn't listen to this one with your toddler in the car. There is a little bit of profanity in this episode. I hope it doesn't offend anyone. But I think it's well worth listening to. I'm sure you will enjoy it. So without further ado, here is Jake Easton from Tribe. Hi, Jake. Welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast.
Hi, Faden. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I really look forward to it.
It's really good to finally get to chat. You've wound up being the eighth of eight roaster invitee guests to this podcast. Though originally you were going to be number 2 or 3, but it didn't work out. But I'm glad that we're finally getting to chat on this format. A lot of people have asked about your interview.
Oh, well, 8 is the most auspicious number in the Chinese world, so I'm going to go with it being a good thing that I'm number 8. I like the number 8. It means the infinite, so that's sort of where we sit with what we know about coffee and everything. So.
Perfect. Sounds ideal. Well, before we get into all the coffee stuff, as you may have heard on some of the other episodes, I always like to start by asking the guests about what they were doing before coffee. And I mean, I know a little bit of your story, but certainly not all of it, not all the details. I know you were involved in wine before coffee, and you've done a lot of other stuff. Can you give the listeners a kind of brief overview of what were you doing before you got into the coffee industry?
I was a beach lifeguard. Then I was a circus artist, trapeze artist. Then I was a bouncer in a strip club. Then I owned a bar. Then I was a university student. I was on MTV in America teaching how to beat the standardized tests there. Then what else did I do? I worked in Hollywood for a while. At Paramount Pictures and 20th Century Fox as an executive in the development world. Then I started taking photographs professionally, and I took images and wrote poetry for a living. Mind you only make about 75 cents a line in poetry, so it wasn't very profitable. I wrote articles for magazines, wrote a book about what happens before you become a father. No, then I worked in a bar in Camps Bay, believe it or not, and then sold a house in Hout Bay and bought a farm in the Overberg and farmed 35 hectares of apples and tested the soil, did root stock analysis and all the chemistry behind soil analysis and soil heat units and cold units, and which vines would work best on a hillside outside of a small village called Greyton in the Overberg, and planted 11.5 hectares of wine grapes, made wine from grapes from Klein Constantia, excuse me, and then I made a Viognier from the vines that I planted on the farm, and it was the best wine I've ever had in my life. And it's turned out to be the #1 Viognier in the world outside of France. My ex-wife has it. So then I got a divorce. I don't know. Then I slept on couches and swept the floors at Origin, and was taught to be a barista trainer by Cuff, who works for Bean there. And then from that point, as a barista trainer, I did that for about a month or two. I moved to roasting coffee for Origin when Cuff went and got a job with Bean there. I started off using the concept of molecular stability in coffee density to try to figure out how to roast decaf coffee. So my first iteration as a coffee roaster was to try to apply science and use the basic science of wine. So the chemistry of wine and what heat meant in relation to ripe seeds or unripe seeds, and how to moderate heat and the values of heat, which is really just energy, in order to create continuity in a coffee bean. Especially coffee beans often are roasted really very quickly. Decaf coffee needed, it took me, I was Stephen and Jeffrey and Stephen and Jeffrey from Union Hand Roasted came down to visit Joel, and I was introduced to them, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I told them what I was doing about decaf. And they said, "Wow, it's great that you get to experiment with somebody else's coffee." I said, "Yeah, no, I'm experimenting with it, but no one cares about it. And I figure if I care about it, then in the end, it'll be worth money." And we saw at the end that the decaf sales from Origin went from being 5% of their total sold coffee to 15%.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it was all because the application, the way that people applied themselves towards decaf prior to that point was just to say, make it brown, which really is sort of that second wave coffee revolution. Let's make it brown, consistently brown over time. That sort of Vienna roast or French roast or whatever you want to call it.
And so this was 2009. You joined the team at Origin. I mean, I suppose that was shortly after Origin was getting started. This was when David was still there and everything, right at the beginning of the whole thing. Um, and how long were you with Origin?
Oh, I wasn't there very long. I think I was there from March of 2009 through yeah, that would have been April of 2009. No, it was March of 2009 through until sort of February, March. It was almost a year.
Okay. And what was next? I mean, you didn't go on to start Tribe right after that, did you?
No, I got a job working on a wine farm in the Côte d'Or in France.
Okay.
In Burgundy. So they tasted one of my bottles of wine and really liked it, and I was invited there. The woman who owned the farm is South African, and I was invited there to work on the farm. I thought I was going to go make wine, and she had 2 winemakers at the time, and so I was like cast into this weird role of like pruning vines, checking wine barrels, and spraying crops with a spray cart and a tractor, which wasn't. It's farming, so you just sort of know how to do it, and with lots of practice. and so I was there for 5 months, 6 months. At the end of 6 months, I said the woman I was with there actually said to me, "You don't enjoy doing this because she's not going to let you make wine. She's not letting you make wine, and you really want to make wine." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, if you can't make wine, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, the only other thing I can do is really coffee." I was not going to go back in the film business because I actively hated it. My stepfather was a screenwriter, and he made lots of money and did a great job in the film industry. And I taught at AFTA, the film school in Cape Town in Joburg. I was a producer lecturer there. And that was sort of the most that I really wanted to do, was just to give back to the film. And so the only thing I could do really was take photos with cameras that I didn't have because my ex-wife had them, write poetry, which wouldn't pay any bills, write articles for American newspapers that weren't buying anything from anybody overseas because it was too difficult for them to get copy because we had really low speed internet, or coffee. And I loved coffee. And it's interesting because I don't know, do you know Taya Lublinka?
No.
Taya from Zambia. Taya and I were talking about coffee. This is a couple years after the time frame. I'm sort of jumping forward in time, but in wine, you start making wine. You think because you love it, but you end up making wine because you need to be famous, and you need other people to acknowledge how famous you are and how great you are. And in coffee, you enter into coffee because you absolutely love it. You just love it. You wake up in the morning, you have a great cup of coffee, you feel better. You give it to somebody else, they feel better. In wine, you make people drunk, and that sort of hurts a bit. So where wine was this arrogant, I don't know, thing where you always had to be self-aggrandizing, monopolizing the public's perception to say that you're the greatest or that you've got the most amazing thing, whatever it is the opposite to what coffee's about, I think, where you've got to be really a good barista. You've got to really be a good roaster. You've got to be a really good green bean sourcer, understanding what's happening in all the things in the cupping world. To just have a good coffee, to have a great coffee, you've got to actually really be able to afford the great coffee or have the relationship with the farmer. And it's about your relationship, and it's not just about money. It's not just about being famous. It's not just about being in some magazine that somebody says, oh, look how great your wine is. There's no such thing as a Parker, the Parker score.
Mm.
John Cease Robinson or Tim Atkins or Tim Aiken, or anyone. And it's an amazing, amazing thing how beautiful the story of coffee is in the most simple, basic. This is a third world product that the first world consumes. Wine is a first world product that the whole world consumes, but mostly the first world.
Mm-hmm.
Coffee comes from poor countries, is probably shipped out of most poor countries and shipped into the hands of somebody like me or you who really cares, who wants that thing that's in front of them, who believes that thing, these beans in front of them, will make them better, have better things for their people and their friends and their clients, or the restaurants or the staff that are making these coffees. It's just a very, very different world. And coffee is. So Lisa said to me, she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go into coffee because I love it. And I went back to Cape Town and asked Joel and Alejandro to start a business with me. Call it O2, the inexpensive origin coffee.
Okay.
And they both were interested in doing it. And this was in just after my birthday in September. And then after a long sort of weekend of talking and meetings and numbers and spreadsheets and analysis, and everybody agreeing that it was a viable idea, they both said, look, we can't pay you a salary, nor can we do it right now. We can do it in February because we're going into our busiest time. So I had saved a bit of money, and I said to them, okay, cool, guys, if you're not going to do it, I need to do this. I can't wait. And so I went around to different roasters who weren't using their roasters all as much, or who didn't have roasters that knew how to roast and they needed to roast. And So I was roasting on 5 different machines and teaching people how to use their machines and roasting for people. And my first purchase was Empire Cafe. I want to say Empire Cafe. And it was on the 10th of October, 2010.
And this is the same Empire Cafe of Sunday morning at the Empire Cafe, one of your current blends. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a sad story though, because the guy that was a head chef and the owner of Empire Cafe, he's probably been my best friend. I've not had a friend like that since I was a kid, and so we ended up being like full on mates, and it's just really good friends, and they friends in a way that I can't tell you any of the stories because they're incorrect for every audience. Always, there's never a moment where they're appropriate, and if they are appropriate, it's like we went for a walk. There's the most I can tell you of the story. The sad thing is that in 2018 he died, and I hadn't planned on doing an Empire blend. I had, but I hadn't, and I was going to do it as a surprise for him. And then Romeo won the AeroPress champs that year, and Dave died the next day. So I had to do a funeral, and we had to paddle out. I'm a surfer and been surfing since I was 7, and there was a time when I was dirt poor. Even I had less money than I had when I was working for Origin. I think I had 40 Rand to my name. I've had 40 Rand to my name a couple times, and not just for a day or two, like for like a week. How do you make 40 Rand last a week? And I was sitting in his restaurant, the Empire Cafe in Musenberg. He said, "What the hell?" He said, "What the F are you doing here?" And I looked at him and said, "I'm, having a coffee." He said, "Get the fuck out." So what do you mean? And look, this is a man who's my friend. Like, he wasn't saying this to be rude. Maybe he was, but he wasn't rude because I know him. And he said, "Get the fuck out of here." So what do you mean? He says, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm a coffee roaster, and I teach people about coffee, and I research coffee, and I try to write articles about it and design cafes." And he goes, "So go fucking do it." He said, "Do you love what you do?" And I said, "Yeah, I absolutely love it." He said, "Well, go fucking do it." And it was one of those sort of simple moments that, looking back on it, was no big deal. But it was so important in as much as it said to me, tiny thing, I love what I do. I wake up every morning wanting to learn more, wanting to tell other people more about what it is I do. And then I was feeling in a funk for whatever reason, probably because I only had $40. And he said, "Go, get out, go sell." And I did. And that same day I got Need Bakery because of what he said. And a couple days later, I got two of the Madame Zingara restaurants. And then a few days after that, I got an ad agency. And then it was just sort of snowballed after that. Like, I just put my head down and didn't stop, and I wouldn't give up, because if I couldn't give up, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know about you, Faden, but like, I started off with 25 kilos of coffee and 40 Rand in my pocket. That's how skint I was. I spent everything on like beans, and printer paper, and stickers, and anything I could do to like seem like I had a business. I had no roastery. I had no grinder. I had nothing. All I had was like really tasty coffee, and I could teach people how to make it.
And so, so obviously it started in that kind of wholesale side of the business. So how did the business start to evolve to what it is today? Because obviously now you have, a roastery, multiple cafes. How did that come to pass?
So in that first year, I got really fortunate. I met a guy named Chip Cathcart K from Malawi, and I was using Malawian coffee from the very beginning because I really like Malawian coffee. I think Malawian coffee has been or was really terribly underrated because the way, well, I'll tell you why in 2 passes. One pass is traditional thinking always said Malawian coffee wasn't that good. And then traditional thinking always said that even if it was good, it's Malawi and no one cares. So I was buying Malawian beans from the Cathcart K at Satemwa, and Chip ran into me, and I knew about his farm. I knew about him, and he was a hoot. And his son Alexander, who runs Satemwa now, was a very upfront, nice man. And Chip wanted to roast in Malawi, and so I said, look, if you pay my way up there, I'll commission your machine and teach your staff how to roast Malawian coffee, and I'll make sure that we can take. Am I going to assume that people understand words like mbuni? Or should I explain it a little bit?
I don't understand the word mbuni, so maybe not.
Okay, so I said to him, I'll make sure that all of your grades of coffee from mbuni, which are like sweepings or seeds that are left on the tree, on the bush. So if you forget a coffee cherry on the tree, the cherry sort of hardens around the outside of the seed, and it creates something called an mbuni. And in the past, mbunis were never thought of as very good coffee. Always used along with sweepings and ears and chips as sort of filter coffee. You're going to roast for filter or really low end, or they used it for instant coffee or a number of things. Anyway, but none of it was really considered for use in a coffee blend. And because of my experience at Origin, and because of my experience roasting on 8 different types of roasters, I knew that I could get their coffee beans to taste really good from their mbunis, which were crop that they couldn't sell. They had to in a way give it away, sell it for 10 rand a kg, 5 rand a kg at a loss. Or if somebody bought a pallet of coffee, they would add a bag of mbuni just as an extra, and they lose that money. And so what I said to them, we'll use 10% of your coffee blend will be mbuni. And his son Alexander didn't believe me. And then I got there, and I know a little bit about roasting, and so I was able to make sure that the mbuni tasted. You couldn't notice any of the defect flaws initially in a cupping table, and then when you added it to the blend, the defect flaws really fell away. And then when you put it into an espresso machine, it was like, hey, this is coffee you can drink. This is like really good, sweet, smooth Malawian coffee. And when I went away and did that, I came back, and it was like something had changed in me, because I'd supplied all my clients, and I came back and I had a little extra pocket money, and now I could buy a grinder. And once I bought a grinder, it was like, oh, I can have a business. I'm going to survive. This is not going to be small anymore. And I had a meeting with a woman from Food Lovers Market who had heard about what I was doing and wanted to get to know me, because she thought she was going to roast. And then when she realized that they couldn't, she introduced me to the owners of Food Lovers Market. And at that time, I was probably roasting 200, 300 kgs a week.
Oh, wow.
All on other people's drums, hey? So I was roasting at other people's roasteries. So I was roasting for all these other people, at all these other people's roasteries, teaching them how to roast, and then hiding the fact that I was roasting so much. Like, I'd only roast Brazil at this one guy, and I'd only roast Malawi and it was Indonesia and Malawi at the other one. And then I would only roast anything else at these other guys, so that no one knew how much I was roasting, because I knew that they would be unhappy about that, because I was probably roasting more than they were. And I got a chance to open up the Food Lovers Market in Tokai, and I was able to buy two machines, and I got the commission from that. And I was able to do training, and I got the commission from that. And at that point, there were 2 people that worked for Truth Coffee that left or wanted to leave. And one of them was Kate, and she joined me probably a year and a half after I started. And this is like, every morning I would go out to buy green coffee from different green sellers. That was the pattern. So the early pattern was go buy coffee in the afternoon, show up as early as possible at any of the roasteries that would let me in early, roast as much coffee as I could on the roastery, on the drums, bag it, blend it, bag it, deliver it, come back to the same roasteries, train on the roaster with one of their roasters, teaching them everything they need to know about drum management, fire, how do you moderate heat, what does energy mean as far as a thermodynamic tool. And then I'd go back out and I'd buy more green beans in the afternoon. And I show up the next morning and do it again. And that's what I did. And I did that for a year. You know, sometimes I was bagging coffee at home. I was bagging coffee at different restaurants. If there was a bag sealer someone had, I would borrow it. I've used hair iron, you know, those hair curler irons that women use to straighten their hair, straightener things. I've used those to seal bags. I bought a grinder off of Gumtree that was a motor. It was like a pump motor. It was a pump motor that some guy had attached two blades to, or blade to, and fixed another blade on the top. And there was no way to change it. Like I tried to change the grind settings so that I could like get anything other than filter. It didn't work. So I bought a bigger blade and I put a thicker blade on the static side, and then it ground for espresso. But it took, no lie, 15 minutes to grind a kilo. So I was grinding coffee and bagging coffee and doing all of that until 2 a.m, and then do it again the next day and do it again the next day. And Kate joined me in the middle of that process. We had a plan to work with a company called the Bertha Foundation, which is a big group out of New York, run by a family that's really got so much money. I can't really talk about them, but they led us to believe that they were going to start us in a cafe and a roastery, and we'd sent a lawyer's document to them, and so we'd agreed to start this business with them. And the day before, or the day after Kate had quit working for Origin or Truth, she came and joined me, and they then pulled the plug on the deal. So she was out of work. It was my fault, and there was no way through. And I had been teaching and training and helping people at the different roasteries, and I knew there was a drum that was available for sale, a 25 kg or 22 kg Probat from the 1960s or 50s. So we approached her parents and said to her parents, look, you know, you could buy a share in the business if you buy the roaster. And the guy sold us the roaster for now, which is like pennies, 150,000 Rand for 22 kg, 22 UG22 Probat, which is sort of like the Rolls Royce of old school roasters, drum roasters. It's just a beautiful machine, so consistent and so easy, and like just a great machine. And so her parents paid for it. She got shares in the business, and we had to move it by hand. And so I used to be a circus performer, trapeze rigger. So we put it on a bunch of posts, gum posts, rolled it out of the roastery that it was in. And I had a flatbed truck that was going to tow it, tow this roaster from the roastery that it was at to the day before. I'd called in every favor I knew from anybody who knew developers and said, I need a space that I can put a roaster in, that I can roast, and I'll be a really good tenant. Just I can't pay more than 3,000 or 4,000 Rand a month. So I found a place in Sunrise Circle that was 4,000 Rand a month, and I literally signed the lease an hour before we got the machine, before we got the drum. There was no ducting. There was no way to power it on. Like I had to figure out how to do all that stuff. We couldn't afford the money to run the ducting out the window and up the wall. So I had figured out how to get ducting to a window, but I couldn't get it out the window because I didn't have any more. So I broke out one of the panes of the window. At first I just opened the window, and then the southeaster blew one day, and it was just a joke. So the smoke went out and smoke came right back in. That was one day of fun. Actually, it was like a month like that. And then I broke a window. I shoved this thing out the window. And then the smoke sort of went out, but it didn't. So I got this roaster to work. Bradley Juder joined us then. And I was always of the belief that tribe should be a thing where it's shared. It's everybody. So Bradley got shares in the business, and my belief was if you give somebody a chance to do the work, they're going to prove themselves. And ownership always is one of the best ways of getting people to feel like they have a stake in what's going to go down.
And so fast forward to today, tell us more about what Tribe looks like now, right? I mean, it's obviously come a long, long way since that time you described.
Yeah, no. So then we got 14, I designed 14 cafes for Food Lovers Market, 12 cafes for Food Lovers Market in Gauteng, and in a couple other provinces in Natal and the Eastern Cape, and set them up. And it was like we went from doing maybe a ton a month, no more than, actually about a ton and 1.2 tons, to doing 3 tons. It was just fantastic. It's like, wow, I can pay a salary, I can make some, I'm not going to be poor forever. And it was like a real game changer. So it gave me an opportunity to think about how do you grow and how do you do it with no money and no investment and nobody helping and no like handout. And when I look around at the people that are in this industry, I see so many examples of that happening now with people of color that I think it's just fantastic. That's a very brief aside that everyone's getting a chance to grow into this business. Mm. And I think the staid old examples of the people who were in this business in the past will move away, will end, will stop, and we'll start seeing more interesting, creative, driven people who do it out of love. And that's where the business really began, was a point of love. And now I'll probably have, I don't want to lie, 100 or so clients countrywide, 4 or 5 overseas, 2 cafes, roastery that does, by South African standards, quite a lot of coffee, but by international standards, very little. But it's all done from a place of like real caring and love. And I think if you visit Tribe or go to the roastery, you see it in the eyes of the people that are working there. They're a bunch of goofballs, and they're also really clever, and they're also incredibly passionate. And if you speak to Romeo, who's been roasting now at Tribe for the last 2 years, or last year and a half, you'll see the same sense of love and caring and excitement about what he does. He cares about what he does. All the trainers that are there now, they care about what they do. They like people and they want people to be better at it. And there was a thing, I don't know, if you've ever gone and done an Origin barista training, there was a thing that was started from George and Cuff and myself, where we tried to have do a deal with any of the trainees. I think even Jo Barry, when I was teaching her how to be a trainer, there was like a moment where you have to do a deal with all of your students. And the deal that you make with them is really odd. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, Faden, but the deal was like, you have to try to make the best coffee possible, because if you don't make this the best coffee you've ever had every single time, the people that come to your cafe, this cafe, any cafe, aren't going to come back and have that coffee anymore. So that means that all of the farmers that you buy the beans from won't have a sell through to you, and they'll be looking for other people to buy their beans at a lower price just to sell their coffee. So the idea is that the better I can do my job as a roaster, the better I can do my job as a barista, the more money that the farmer will make and the more sales that the farmer will have. And here was the deal that we made with all those baristas, and that we still continue to make today with all of them, is that if you're not willing to do that and you don't really believe in this, you shouldn't be a barista. You shouldn't be doing what you do as a roaster. Because if you agree to this, you agree to try to help these invisible people who you will never meet, who you will never know, on the other side of the planet, who have lives that you've never heard of, in languages that you've never learned how to speak, from little villages that start with CTLP, in the middle of nowhere. You have to agree that what you're going to do is going to be the best possible thing, so that that guy, man, woman, child, whoever, they receive the benefit of your ability. And you must push that out and carry that on and carry on giving that forward, and apply that not only to sort of low grade specialty bulk coffee, bad low grade coffee, specialty grade coffee, 90 plus grade coffee. You do it across from A to Z. And if you weren't, and we would, that was the deal. We would say, if you weren't willing to do this, that's cool, but you're going to take a 15-minute break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you a question. And they'd all come back. And I remember watching George do it, and then I watched Cuth do it, and I did it. And because we came up with that idea, and it works, because you ask them, say, are you willing to help people that you're never going to meet? And that goes back to that sense of like caring and love, and like, why do I do this? And I've only had, I almost said never, but it's not true. I've only had like 5 people from Origin and Tribe say they don't want to do it.
I love that. I love it. I hadn't actually heard about this deal. I didn't realize that this was part of the training program. Maybe it means I need to go do the barista training, but I love that. I love that sentiment. I think that that's something cool to put out there for the people working in coffee. I think that segues nicely to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your team. Tell us about what does the Tribe team look like today?
They're hideous people. This group, I've never seen an uglier group. Well, excluding Sadiqa, Linda, Londo Miso, and Coco, whose real name isn't Coco, but we're calling her Coco. They're all beautiful people. The women who work for me are amazing. Work with me, sorry, are amazing, incredible, talented people who all started doing things differently, with the exception of Linda, the head chef. Everybody else sort of did other things and fell into doing what they're doing, because they're actually really very clever and really valuable and wonderful, incredible people. And all the men are hideous. They're just terrible, horribly ugly people. No, I think they're great. All of them. Like, I could talk for hours about each one of them and how amazing they are. I mean, I've obviously mentioned Romeo Chimunya. I think he started off at Seattle, and then he went to Bean there, and then he went and joined somebody over by Baseline Coffee. I forget, it might even have been Baseline. Anyway, so he was chasing money, and then he came to me, and I was flabbergasted that he'd come to Tribe to join us, because he was a gem. He is a gem. He's just an incredible guy. Ken. Ken, I don't know if have you ever met Ken the barista?
Oh yeah, no, I've met Ken a few times. I mean, I remember when he was competing. I don't know how much he's been competing recently, but a few years ago, I remember watching his sets as well.
I know he's a South African barista champ for 2019 for AeroPress.
Oh yeah, and Romeo's had that title as well, right? So it seems to be a consistent thing.
We don't really compete much, actually, at all. We don't compete at all, and that was the funnest part. Was like, yeah, we know how to do AeroPress. We have them. We know how to use them. We like watching all of the science behind it and the cool and this and all that fun stuff. We actually just make a lot of coffee all the time. And so, I know how to make AeroPress. I know how to screw them up, but I also know how to do them. And if any two of the people on the team sit together long enough, they're going to figure out how to make something great from almost anything. Because it's like 4 tenants at Tribe. Be nice. It's the first one. Stay curious. There is no better. There is only different. Perfect practice makes perfect. That's from circus. That's from the trapeze. On the trapeze, if you're really good at doing the wrong thing really well, it means you're the best at doing the wrong thing ever, which doesn't mean you're doing it right, and you could die. So you practice doing it perfectly. And by doing something perfectly, it means that you can do it 10 times in a row, 10 times. It means you can do it 100 times the same way every single time and not change. So that means you're doing perfect. Practice makes perfect. And then I think the last one was there's no such thing as a problem. There's only the solution that you haven't found. That I make everybody read that in the very beginning when they join Tribe. And the people that join Tribe sort of have all those things in their heads anyway. The reason Kenny won is because Romeo and Ken sat together and said, how are we going to make this taste great? And then they asked me, and then they asked Chris, and then they made it taste great. It was fantastic. Then Romeo won. And then Kenny said, I'm going to beat Romeo. I'm going to be even more consistent, and it's going to taste even better. And they got it right. Then there's Matthew. Matthew started off as a sweeper and now is in charge of all production in the roastery. There's Trust, who works with Matthew, and Trust works for another coffee company, but he works with us as well. And then in dispatch, there's Sidika and Coco. And Sidika is sort of in charge of the entire roastery. She's a mother of two. She's cool-headed. I always think she reminds me a lot of Ramona from Origin. There's a similar sort of vibe, which I really like. Both ladies are incredible people.
I think that that's an apt comparison. Sidika and Ramona both take very good care of us at Cape Coffee Beans.
Man, they also are that same vibe, that same heart. They both have the same heart, which is, I think it's very South African, to be totally fair. It's very, to be blunt. And then in the cafe, we've got Lulu, whose name is either Malume or Malambo, or there's another name. And he's got 5 different names. We don't know which one is his real name. So literally, I started calling him Lulu because I was like, none of these names are your names. He said, no. And I said, you're not going to tell us which one. He goes, ha, 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 your name's now Lulu. So he's Lulu. And Lulu was a barista at Need Bakery in Muizenberg, when I used to supply them. And he was terrible. And every time I teach something, he'd like refuse to do it. 5 minutes after I left, and I'd go back and he'd continue screwing up. And so he failed up there. And then who else is there? Leslie's there now. Leslie comes from the restaurant business, and so he runs the cafe. And then, like I said, we lost 5, 6 casual people who are all amazing. By the way, there's a young barista out there named Jessie, who her father is Donald, and Jessie is one of the finest young baristas I've ever had the pleasure of drinking coffee from. She is just I've given her single origin Ethiopians, Dilma Yergachev. She got a grade 1 Brazilian that tasted like orange peels and sugar, and she made it taste better. She's without question one of the finest, most gifted natural baristas I've ever encountered anywhere. And her dad runs a cafe for a big company. And he said, oh, can you give her a job? And I was like, well, we'll do training and we'll see what happens. See if we can't give her a job after training. He said, just finished high school.
Amazing.
She said, because everybody comes to me to taste their coffees. Not everyone. If I'm there, I get to taste their coffees. And she made these coffees that was the best coffee I'd had in a month, 2 months, 3 months. And two of my baristas are phenomenal baristas. And then we have kitchen team Linda, she's a godsend. She's like a bright light of joy, the biggest smile and the nicest. She's just wonderful. Anyway, so Jesse, if anybody wants Jesse's phone number, please, I'll tell Faden what it is, and you guys can reach out to him. If you need a phenomenal barista, she's it, man. Tag. If you want one, she's the shit, and I don't say that easily.
Well, talking about the barista segues nicely into one of the other things I wanted to ask you about. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how would you characterize Tribe's approach to the coffee itself, right? Like I think you've really conveyed well like what your brand values are about, what your business's values are about, what the people are like. What about the coffee? How would you characterize Tribe's approach to coffee?
It's complicated. I really like single origin, aromatic, fruity, spicy, amazing coffees. If I could drink that every day, I would. Um, the vast majority of people in South Africa don't want those coffees. They just want a coffee that's sweet and chocolatey and nice. And when I was on the farm making wine, and I got lucky enough to do a graduate school of business seminar, week-long seminar at UCT at the waterfront. And they had a guy in from the University of Adelaide and a couple other people. And this man from the University of Adelaide, this professor, he said, "Don't fucking make wine for you, mate. Make it for the people who are going to drink it." It's a really bad accent, but it made sense. It made like a ton of sense. Like, oh, right. You have to give them what they want. Give the people what they want. If somebody wants a coffee that tastes like chocolate, sweet, yummy goodness, give them that. If somebody wants a coffee that's really dark and bitter because they want to add sugar to it and they only want it to be a single shot, give them that. If somebody wants a fruity coffee, tell them they're foolish and give it to them, and then hold the other coffees back and then give them that. If somebody wants a special coffee that's unique to them, I should know, or Chris should know, or Romeo should know, or Ken should know, or Matthew should know enough about all of the coffees that we have that we can create a blend that's exactly what the person wants, or as close to perfect as can be. For example, one of the people that I've recently met, who I absolutely think is an amazing guy, is a man named Hassan, and he's a bridge engineer, but he's got a coffee shop, and he was going to use coffee from Joburg. And I said, look, you have the opportunity to like pick the brains of some of the best roasters in the world here in Cape Town. Why don't you do that? And I said, do you want to taste the blend? What do you want to do? Single origin? What? And he said, I want it to have this, this, and this. I said, okay, cool. Can I make that for you real quick? And then we'll taste it and see if it's right. And then we'll go from there. And that's how a roaster works, is that they give the people what they want. And if enough people want a specific thing, then it becomes a blend that you sell to everybody else. So the espresso blend started off as, it was called the E blend, which was a joke about drugs, but it was called the E blend that I gave away as gifts in other cafes so that I could see if people like them. And famously, in one cafe, there was a barista there who now is a trainer working with me, and he said, "This is fantastic." I said, "Yeah, I think it's pretty good." And he gave it away, and I came back and I asked the owner of the restaurant, I said, "How did that coffee go?" And the person told me, I can't say the sex because that'll tell you where the place is, and I don't want to insult anybody. And they said more people wanted more coffee because it was this coffee than the other coffee. So I realized that I'd figured out something about the South African taste profile. And coming from wine, you have to memorize quite a lot, aroma and taste wise, and then acidity wise, and then mouthfeel wise. And you had to know quite a lot about aromatic changes with wood. And I applied all of those lessons to coffee. And then I really applied them to coffee sort of full bore all the time. and really got into it. The idea of the smells and the blends and the how do you recreate the same taste and recreate the same blend and give people the right profile. So you take that idea that you can recreate that smell or that taste and you do it. And you know that, say, for example, Honduran coffee in general, not the high end stuff, but in general is sort of a medium to low acidity with a really nice round mouthfeel and a fairly low umami and a medium to high sweetness. The aromatics that you're going to get from it might be vanilla-ish, chocolatey-ish. And you know that if that's a piece of your blend, if you use that at 30% on top of a base blend, base coffee, and a base coffee can be anything that you use as your base, because there's so much Brazil in the world, people use Brazil often. But then you build your blend on top of your base, and you know that that 30% of this coffee is going to give you this aromatic and this low acidity. Now, acidity is that mover, right? So acidity is that mover. And if you have too much acidity, it makes your mouth water too much and you lose all of the aromatics and all of the taste profiles. So each one of the blends that I've created or that were created as a result of people liking the coffee and wanting more of the coffee were done so that we could recreate it regardless of what coffee beans we had available.
And I guess that, through creating these different blends is how you've come up with all these different ones that many of Cape Coffee Beans customers know and love today, right?
Well, but that's the thing. Like, if you like it, I'm going to make more of it. And if it sells more, I'm going to name it and I'm going to tell the story behind it. And then it's going to go on Cape Coffee Beans shelf. And like, if you look on the tubes that we've got now at Cape Coffee Beans, they all tell a tiny story. All these little stories that I've talked about, they're all sort of on these little tubes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that. I think that is really what I think you've kind of put words to what I've long felt is the difference in terms of, the approach of Tribe, because I do think it's a different brand from a lot of our other roasters. And what you said about, making coffee for the people, but also kind of creating blends that people just really love and keep coming back to. And I know that we have lots of people that walk in the door at Cape Coffee Beans and, they know which Tribe coffee it is they like, and that's what they get. And that's what it is for them.
And that's the whole thing. Like, Ernesto Illy in the 1960s said you have to have 7 coffees in your blend or else you can't repeat it. What he failed to say was he could do that because he could buy the entire crop from Guatemala. Where the rest of us then had to figure out, how do we replace Guatemala? What do you use to replace Guatemala when there isn't any left in the world? So we use sometimes 11 different coffees to make a blend that people think only has 4. But they'll never know that there's 11 in there because it doesn't smell that way and it doesn't taste that way. The only people that would know are like green bean Q graders. That was the thing I was going to say about Malawi, but I'll do that later. Anyway,
What were you going to say about Malawi?
No, just about roasting. So everyone assumed that Malawian coffee was bad because all the Q grading is done on the same roast profile. So you always roast it the same color, the same way, the same color, same time, same color, same time, same color. And what ends up happening is some coffees actually need to go a little darker, or some coffees need to be a little lighter, or some coffees need to have some more development, for lack of a better word. But it is the right word. So they need to have more development in their roast profile before acid acquisition. And that I did that to Malawi. So all of a sudden Malawi went from being this coffee that people thought was insipid and weak to being this really rich, chocolatey, full-bodied, like this is fantastic. And it only became fantastic because guys like me were saying how fantastic it was if you roasted it with the right sort of thinking. And I know that the price of coffee when I first started buying it in 2010, Malawian was 52 Rand a kg.
Oh, wow.
53 Rand a kg, ex-fat. And then in 2011, at the end of 2011, when word got out that I was using so much Malawi and so many different coffees, I think the entire crop that could be purchased into South Africa was gone before I got a bag of it. I had to actually call in favors from people all across the country. and it was sold then for 85 Rand a kg. And it was like, ah, here's the proof. This is proof. If you use it and people like it, they can make more money. A, B, C.
There it is. It's funny. It's funny you mentioned the Malawi as well, because I remember, my first kind of cups of Tribe coffee, and I have a particularly fond memory of one of my first AeroPress brews with a Tribe Malawi Gold many years ago, and being like, wow, this tastes like caramel, and it was quite an experience. And so I remember that very fondly. And you guys still have the Malawi Gold in your offering.
Now we buy directly from a village in Malawi that was not selling any of their coffee. They were just letting it fall. And there's a guy named Grant Harrison. He went because of our Malawi thing. He went to Malawi and found a village that was willing to sell coffee to us. So he bought it all. And so they sell all of their coffee to us now every year. So we buy all of the product from this one village in the middle of Malawi. And we're supposed to go last year and we're supposed to go this year. And obviously there's a little kink in that one. But so it got to be that I couldn't buy Malawi from other people because I couldn't trust getting enough. And then Grant was like, no, I'll go get Malawian coffee for you. And he did. And he's the man. Grant is the man. So that was like one of those things where all of a sudden the full circle was selling coffee the way I sold coffee, using coffee the way I use coffee, talking about coffee the way I talk about coffee. And then, as you know as well as I do, what's the golden rule in coffee is prove it, right? Somebody says my coffee tastes like cherries, you're like, okay, cool, let's make it. Better taste like cherries.
Yeah.
That's my favorite moment. He says, I've got a coffee, it smells like pineapple. I'm like, okay, let's grind it and smell it. You can't BS your way out of that. Like, I've done it. I'm sure you've done it when people say, oh, it tastes like cherries and hazelnut and breadfruit. You're like, buddy, you've never had breadfruit. Let's not go down that road.
Well, that invites a question that I want to end with here, Jake, because I'm very curious what you're drinking at home these days. And what are you drinking? What does it smell like? And how are you brewing it?
At home, I tend to drink the coffees that we're most curious about, because I've got a NanoPress, an AeroPress, pour over, and a Mocha Master. And I'll drink at home in the morning a liter of coffee easily. And I really enjoy and carry on enjoying Indonesian. And it's not even a coffee that I sell as a single origin, but it's part of a blend. And I really enjoy an Indonesian really blue coffee. There's an SHP that we've got Indonesian that's really lovely. I like the spiciness of it. But then again, sometimes I really like Brazil in the morning. So I've got a Brazilian coffee that I keep here as well. And of course, I've got Malawi. And because I like to try things out, I blend whatever I've got at differing amounts and write it down and try to see what I get as an outcome.
Oh, wow. So have you come up with any blends that way that you've used
Yeah,
later?
yeah. The famous one is the Lover's Blend. That was for a woman. That was that is the love of my life, aside from my children. That and she left South Africa, and I wanted to keep her. And she was overseas, and there was no way she was going to come back, and I couldn't keep her. And she's a human being, and it's illegal, whatever. And so I sent her coffee. I sent her a blend, and I made it chocolatey, smooth, sweet, aromatic, beautiful, beautiful coffee. And I did it because I wanted her to remember how much I love her. And it worked. The only bummer was I forgot how I made it. I actually forgot. I forgot. Like it was so good. I was amazed at how good it was at the roastery. And I sent a kg off to her, and there was a kg at the roastery. And everybody else, I had one glass of one or two glasses of cups of it, and everybody else drank the kg in a day. It was gone. They drank it in a day. They had it as espresso. They had it with coffee, with milk. They drank it straight out of filter machines, and it was gone. The next day, at the time, it was Ferdy in the roastery. Ferdy came to me and said, what was that blend? It was so good. Can we have that again? I'd forgotten how I made it. I had no idea. I didn't write anything down. I hadn't like paid attention. I just knew what was right in that moment, and that's how I made it. So for 6 months, they would ask me every day, what was that coffee? What was that coffee? What was that coffee? And then I think it was like 6 months and 4 hours later, Ferdy came and said, Jake, she just called. She wants that coffee. We have to send it to her. You never believe it. Kate was in the other room. Kate, Jake, you got to make that coffee. Oh my God. So I stood there and looked at the beans, and I took about 15 minutes, and I made one pass and I threw it away. Then I made another pass, and I was like, oh, it's this. And it was like, and I made it, and it was just as good and just as sweet and just as amazing. And like, it nailed it. And then I said, okay, did you send it to her? And he said, no, she never called. Are you kidding me? And if it's any consolation, really, the thing is, she still has a lot of love for me, and I still have a lot of love for her.
Well, and a lot of people still have a lot of love for that coffee, because obviously that is one of your perennial blends now, which is great.
And that's the thing. This year is the 10th anniversary, right? So October 10th this year is our 10th anniversary. And it has been so much fun to be in South Africa, in one of the smallest coffee consuming countries in the world, in a place where the only people that were really pushing for actual change in how people drank coffee was at first one guy named David, and then was Joel and David, and then from Joel and David it became Joel, David, I think Renato was Jono, Renato. Then a year and a half later, Ann Union joined Seattle, and what's his name was there, Gerald was there, and that changed that whole world there. And I started, and I was going, and then Judd was going, and he was doing it his way. And, you know, the Bean There crowd was doing it in Joburg at the same point as, I think it was, so it was right around, they started with Cuth, so that was 2009, that was 2009. So everything has happened so fast in this world here. In 10 years ago, you couldn't get a good cup of coffee. 10 years later, you sure as fuck struggle to find a bad cup of coffee, because there's so many places that make great coffee.
Yeah, the landscape has really changed, even in the time that I've been working in it.
But sure. I mean, if you recall 20 years ago, cappuccino was cup of chino, and it was filter coffee with foam was terrible. And even looking at where the world is now today with coffee, like South African roasters and South African baristas are really very good. And the ones that are good are really good. You know, Benji Lovejoy is one of the best baristas in the world. Winston's one of the best in the world. And that list is actually much bigger than just those two guys, because Sim from Rosetta, she's one of the best baristas in the world. But then the roasters are all very good. I mean, the top end guys are like brilliant.
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of world-class coffee roasters in this little city.
And it's all done from science and love. Like, obviously, I can't afford really expensive single origin coffee, because that's not what people want to drink in my world. Even though we supply 7 of the restaurants in the top 20, even though we supply those guys, like, they don't want to have the wild, fruity, amazing, show-stopping coffees that I love so much. You know, they'll have a Kenyan that's got a bit of a orangey thing, but it's too acidic, and they want it sweeter. But I'm really proud and very stoked to be roasting the coffees that I do for the people that I roast them for.
And I know a lot of people are very happy that you are. And I think that that's a great note to end on there, Jake. Thank you so much for the time and for answering the questions and giving the audience some background on your amazing story of how you got here. I know that we're recording this in uncertain times, so I think I probably speak for a lot of people when I say that I hope that you guys weather this storm and that it continues to go well in the future.
Faden, thank you for having me on the show. It's really been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure watching you grow from a guy who just likes coffee to doing what you're doing today. And if you love what you do, you're always going to be doing it no matter what.
That was Jake Easton of Tribe Coffee Roasting. He really is an interesting character and has some incredible stories to tell. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did recording it. And as always, I just want to remind you that you can show support for the roasters that we work with by buying their coffee beans at Cape Coffee Beans. I'll include a link in the show notes so that you can do that and show some support for Tribe. Till next time, happy brewing.